Hey guys, Mike here. In this video, I'm going to attempt to explain why I think Monster Hunter is the greatest game of all time. And yes, you heard that correct. I think it's a pretty bold claim, but this is something I've been thinking about for quite a long time, probably over a year. And the reason I started thinking about this was because of the first time I played Monster Hunter. I clearly already knew it was probably the best game I've ever played. Similar to when Satoru Gojo was born, he was the best Jujutsu sorcerer, and there was just no question about that. I had a similar feeling about Monster Hunter. Like once I played it, I wasn't even really a big fan of the franchise. I just knew it was easily the best game I've ever played. And other games that I've played throughout the years, I'm always comparing it to Monster Hunter, and I always come to the same conclusion that that game that I'm playing is not as good as Monster Hunter. This continually reinforces the idea why I think Monster Hunter is the greatest game ever made. But the question is why? Like I've been trying to figure out the why of this conclusion for the longest time, rather than it just being a gut feeling. And I think I've figured it out. So I'm going to attempt to explain it now. Now, this is not a commentary on like the aesthetic of Monster Hunter or, elements of the game that are very good, but don't really contribute to it being a good game. For example, the story, the aesthetic, the feel, the vibe, these are all, good elements that make it entertaining. But I want to discuss more about what makes it a good video game, which is something I don't see a lot of people talking about. All right, the first thing I want to talk about is the monster skeletons and the variations and their movesets and their animations. Typically, the monsters in Monster Hunter are actually based on a handful of fundamental skeletons. For example, Monster Hunter World, you have the Fanged Wyvern, you have the Flying Wyvern, you have the Brute Wyvern, you have the Elder Dragon skeleton, you have the Rajang skeleton, and I think there may be a couple more. But all of the monsters in Monster Hunter World are based on one of these skeletons. So for example, Tobi-Kadachi and Odogaron are based on the Fanged Wyvern skeleton, and monsters that belong to a certain skeleton archetype have variations in their moves, right? Tobi has different moves from Odogaron, but they're sort of related in their form factor, and some of their attacks cross over. Now, this is good from a design perspective because it means when you fight Tobi-Kadachi and then you fight Odogaron, it's not a completely different monster, right? After you've fought Tobi-Kadachi, you're already used to some of what the things that Odogaron throws at you. And this is good from easing the transition from fighting Tobi-Kadachi to Odogaron. Another example of this is Rathian to Rathalos. If you fought a Rathian, you already somewhat seen some of the moves that Rathalos can throw at you. Same thing with Elder Dragons, Teostra, Kushala, and it's all based on this skeleton idea. Now, other Monster Hunters have more skeletons than those in Monster Hunter World, but the same idea remains. If they share the same skeleton, then there's some crossover with the moveset and how you approach the monster. This is why Monster Hunter allows you to have so many monsters in a game, like over 50 monsters, but it doesn't feel like you're overwhelmed with all the monsters you have to fight because of this crossover due to the fact that monster skeletons are shared. Next thing I want to talk about is the animations of these monsters. The animations of these monsters are very crisp. Like the only way you can see a transition from one attack animation to another attack animation is if you actually record the footage and go by a frame by frame basis. There's actually a 1 frame jitter on the transition from one attack to another attack. And you actually won't catch this unless you're actually doing a frame by frame analysis of the monster. So that's just a testament to how smooth the animations are in Monster Hunter. And it's this smoothness of the animations that add to the realism and the combat experience. Now, the monsters are a really big part of the game, but the next thing I want to talk about are the weapons. So there's a lot of weapons in Monster Hunter, and that wasn't always the case in the older Monster Hunter games, but I think now there's at least 12 weapons for Monster Hunter 5. And the interesting thing is that despite there being a lot of weapons, they all play very differently and they have their own style. While there is some crossover between some weapons, like if you play Sword and Shield, you'll sort of know how to already play some of the Charge Blade, or if you play some Greatsword, you already understand some aspects of Switch Axe, for example. On the whole, the weapons are very unique and you can experience a completely different play style playing one weapon for the whole game and then switching to a different weapon. And that's a good thing because this means there's an insane amount of replay value. The genius of Monster Hunter is that even though you play a whole playthrough on one weapon, or what some people call maining a weapon, you are actually developing crossover skills in that weapon that will apply to another weapon. So even though you switch to another weapon, these crossover skills allow you to pick up that newer weapon much faster. So it's this dichotomy of playing one weapon, allowing you to get better in another weapon as well. That is extremely hard to do because this is a source for a lot of frustration when people pick up different weapons, and preventing that frustration from happening is something I don't think a lot of the developers get a lot of credit for. And this leads into my next point, is the soundness of the weapon movesets. As I study every weapon in Monster Hunter, I've noticed that none of the moves in a weapon moveset are wasted. There's a purpose for every single move. Like even the really obscure moves that you find yourself not using often, even if you find there's a move that you don't use often in a weapon moveset, there's still a use for it. There's still a specific use case for it. For example, one common move that a lot of weapons have is a rising slash, and it doesn't really combo into anything most of the time, these rising slashes, but they're very useful for hitting the monster when it's above your head. And the motion values on these attacks are pretty respectable, so it's not something you should just dismiss as a useless move. There's a lot of purposes for various moves, for example, building up gauge, or gap closing, or quick moves, or topple punishers. There's always a reason for every move in a weapons moveset. And normally that's really hard to do in a video game because with weapon movesets, usually people will min-max and usually try to find the optimal combo for weapon movesets. And this doesn't really work though for Monster Hunter because monsters will give you a time window that they are handing to you that allow you to attack. And there's usually a right answer as to what attack combo you should do. Because they give you different time windows, there's different answers for every situation. And it's up to you to use the weapon moveset and to use the right combination of moves to maximize the damage window that you are given. And all this you can only really do if you study the weapon and you study the monster and you merge those two things together, which is the core of what Monster Hunter gameplay is. And you can see that merging the monster's moveset and merging the weapon moveset that you have and merging the context of the arena you're fighting in and the context of the fight leads to a lot of possible experiences and combinations that can occur in a hunt. You can even do this mathematically. Like you could take the total number of monsters in the game, the total number of movesets, and then also add in a variation factor based on the size of the monster, because that actually does affect the time windows that you're given for a certain monster moveset. And then you add another factor on that of when the monster's enraged, because that adds a 1.1x speed multiplier to the monster, so that adds another layer of variation on top of that. And you can see how many combinations there are in Monster Hunter that create an insane amount of replay value, and why, despite people playing the game for thousands of hours, they still don't feel like the game is old and it still always feels fresh. It's because of these tens of thousands of combinations that can happen in the game that make it so engaging, and why the gameplay never gets old. Now, all of these combat situations and combinations lead into my next point, which is the on-the-fly decision making that is required of you during a hunt. Because of all these combat combinations that can occur during a hunt, you are expected on the fly to make the right decision when it's quote-unquote your turn to attack and defend. That gameplay loop on a micro level is what makes Monster Hunter combat so engaging, because you're always constantly making these decisions and the neurons in your brain are constantly firing off. Anyways, these are the reasons why I think Monster Hunter is the greatest game ever made from purely gameplay perspective. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and thanks for watching.